Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine War News Update. No, it's not. I've just gone into auto. This is, oh my goodness. This is why I have to start my videos about 6 times sometimes, Greg, because I just say the wrong thing. This is a live stream.
Well,
chat.
It's already, you know, the yin and the yang are rolling already. We can't even get through the intro. Let's go.
So with my shiny face, I'd like to introduce Greg Terry from the Greg Terry Experience, world famous for his Ukrainian analysis. And we are going to have a look at the map tonight, have a chat, see how things have been going. We haven't spoken actually for a long time, Greg. So it'll be good to see what each other's views are concerning where the war is at. So welcome all the team members and people who are hanging out here. Greg, welcome to. Well, this is a co-stream. What do you want to start off by acknowledging today?
Well, I just want to acknowledge all the great people here on my channel and your channel, and our continued support. I think we are entering into the phase of support that will be determining for the war. I think there are a lot of net positives happening right now. But in addition to the net positives, we're gonna have to see the response for those and be patient. It's kind of always my best advice. In fact, you and I were just talking about a topic. Somebody said feedback. Shouldn't be any feedback. Michael, oh, that's on your side. There should be just patience when you see things unfold. So we've got some good news to look at tonight. We've got some, in my opinion, some trouble areas on the map and some positive areas on the map. Shells are arriving, I can tell you that. The advantage is coming down for Russia, so we've got good positive things there. North of Kharkiv is very well stabilized. So a lot of good stuff to talk about, to be honest, but I'm still sticking with Peter Pavel 100%. By November we'll know where this war is going. That's what I believe.
Yeah, I'm generally, I think we're fairly similar here, as you expect we should be if we have access to good information and whatnot. We're fairly rational in how we approach the understanding of where this war is at. I have been in a growing positive state of mind over the last, I think, 3 weeks, probably actually since the Kharkiv offensive, and as soon as we realized that it wasn't going to mount to what people were dooming at the beginning, and we started seeing that equipment come in, and then I think politically some shifts have really happened. I think the US has been somewhat stronger in support, with big things coming out. The bilateral agreements are very interesting, although questions about how legally binding that is, but certainly the rhetoric's right. We've got Europe really.
I can answer that for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Gertis and I went over that a couple of days ago. It's based on administration. So, however, the November election, what was in place by the agreement between Joseph Biden and Vladimir Zelensky and their administrations is good until January 20th. And at that point, the next, it would stay in action. And this is, I mean, Gertis laid it out. This is his expertise, would stay active, and Trump or Biden at that point will have to renew it because it's on the administration basis.
I was under the impression that there was some mechanism they put in place with regard to ratifying it through the UN as well. So
who is the UN?
I don't know the details, but there is.
We don't care about the UN.
Yeah, but in other words, that it's slightly more legally binding than just a bilateral. So there is a difference between this bilateral agreement and every other bilateral agreement that's been signed with. So the blueprint, I think they originally used like the UK bilateral agreement to use as a blueprint for all the others, but the American one was apparently somewhat different. And one component is answerable to the UN in some way, yeah, but I don't know the details, so I won't go any further.
No, that's fine. And I'm just going off, you know, I trust Gertis's analysis there. It's not going through the Senate, which really takes the teeth out of it. It's basically an administration to an administration agreement that has to be re-reviewed after the next election. That's the basics of it.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
if the UN plays into that, I would, as an American, be completely against that. I don't think the UN should have anything to do with our supply of aid to Ukraine or any other nation. The UN is a dysfunctional, worthless organization. It's a piece of trash, and the people in the UN are running around the front lines of Ukraine thinking they're doing something. So I personally, I want to kick the UN out of New York. I want to kick them out, and I want that organization to go to oblivion because Russia still sits on the Security Council.
Yeah, and this is I've done a live with Solaria where we looked at the fact that they should not be in the UN at all. In fact, or no, they should not be in the Security Council at all because they assumed that position after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and actually they're not technically on the Security Council, and therefore, and it should just come to an ordinary vote. If someone had the guts to propose it, you can just get them kicked off.
I know that one too. The bottom line is, in general, and safest way to say here is we're supplying aid, we're helping them. It's an administration to administration agreement that will have to be reviewed come 1st of 2025.
But aside from that, things are moving in a very positive way in terms of you just had a peace summit.
And Mr. Squiggle nailed it. He nailed it. He gave us the comment there with what Gertis said, and Gertis is right. This is the stuff he knows. He's probably in here actually creeping on us, but Gertis said if the Senate was to approve it, then it's binding. That's how it binds.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I discussed on the day after it came out, saying that a lot of people saying, there would have to be some kind of congressional validation of that. But
I will tell you this, though, in regard to that, on Saturday, I did a quick stream after the shills because Friday we had a funeral. One of our pastors died, so we took care of that. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So I thought
you said that his father had died, but is it?
Well, he was still. So our pastor's father, who is on our staff. We have lots of pastors.
Right.
He was responsible for like hospital visitation and dealing with the elderly and all that. So he died unexpectedly. So we had to deal with that. So I moved my flag giveaway to Saturday, and I was actually discussing something Saturday after the shills where Stoltenberg from NATO was making some great comments, and I played the video. Of course, he's speaking in English of how he would like to move it to where we have NATO administration of Western aid.
Yes.
Now, that's how you do it. You don't do it through the UN. You do it through NATO, and they administrate, and they make sure that nations are doing what they said they would do.
And actually, so this is what NATO want, but the US has kicked back. So NATO wanted to take control of the Ramstein Defense Contact Group because that is a group of 50 nations where they get together every so often, have these Ramstein meetings, and then loads of aid comes out that to help Ukraine. But in order to Trump-proof it from post-November, NATO want to take over the reins of that, which I think is eminently sensible. But the US, naturally, because they want to be the ones in charge of doing this kind of stuff, had said no. But I wonder if they do put things in place last minute so that if something does go wrong November time, if they get a handle on who's going to get voted in, they might change it then. But as it stands, that's going to stay under the auspices of the US control there.
And listen, overall, I have my notes here because I'm always prepared for Johnny. I have everybody knows I may be a high-tech redneck, but I write my stuff on paper. Okay, so I have my notes, and overall, we actually have good news. I mean, we've had some positive movement. We've got supply coming. But this is the critical time. And you asked me what, in general, because it's been like 8 or 9 days since we did a co-stream, what was my in general thought? Overall, there's a phrase there I want to use.
Cautiously positive.
Thank you. I'm cautiously optimistic. My major concern will stay the two things that I stand by.
Mobilization.
The fulfillment of mobilization, because that is struggling right now, even though we're making positive strides. And secondly is electrical infrastructure. We just had some 100%. Poltava just today, 22 wounded, and that's horrible. Kindergarten hit, residential buildings hit, 22 injured, and that's all horrible. So please, folks, don't misunderstand me. Equally, I want to say the worst part of it all, and maybe I can say that because it doesn't look like we're going to lose any life. They were just wounded, which is bad enough, but we had some high voltage transmission lines and a little station that was destroyed, and about 75,000 people out of power, but the infrastructure was hit. So those are the things that we just you can't calculate if you can't calculate power. And right now we know that until the end of July, especially starting about a week from now, and they project all of that out, it's going to be extremely difficult through July for power. And that is at the level we have now with nothing else being hit. Then if nothing else gets hit, they're going to move into a phase of stability, and it will improve for August through November. And then December, January and February, if everything stays the same, there'll be another 35% deficit. So right now, power and soldiers,
which translates to sort of 8 hours of, well, they were thinking it could get to winter, and it's like you're on 8 hours a day power or something like that. 6 to 7 hours was one number I saw. So, and that's really, really challenging, and that's bad for morale. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for the military industrial complex. It needs the power.
JP, I've lived in that. So all these time on the front, and I will be back on the front imminently. I don't want to tell my travel dates now because I actually have people that watch my stream, and so not 5 people anymore, and it doesn't matter, but now you never know. So I'm trying to protect myself a little bit more and the guys that meet me and all of that jazz. But the reality is I've lived there during significant power outages, and they are a challenge. They're a challenge for the economy. They're a challenge for basic infrastructure. They're a challenge with trolley buses running. Remember, a lot of trains run on electricity. They have the power lines over them. They're running on juice, and the cafes stop. The banks aren't working. The ATMs don't work. Internet goes out. You have a whole chain of events that happen. It's not just darn, I can't warm up my borscht. Darn, the lights are out and I need a candle. No, darn, I can't go to work. I can't get on the bus. I can't go to the bank. I can't go to the doctor.
I can't build an infantry fighting vehicle.
I can't build a drone. I can't turn on my soldering iron. I mean, it's significant. And Zhang is in the chat somewhere on mine or yours.
Nice.
I
completely agree with you. I think, again, as you should expect. So I agree that the two challenges for Ukraine are mobilization, which and exactly the same, it is improving. So it's great to hear that 2,750 convicts have joined, and out of 4,000 that appear to be joining like now. And then I don't know how many they're looking at getting past 4,000, but that's great. It's an area of society which I think you need to tap into. It just makes a lot of sense to do that. So there are things in place, but they need an awful lot, right? And of course, the energy. I think it's a critical vulnerability. And what's really frustrating, I've talked about this a number of times, Greg, where and people have sounded this concern, which is that you have in Berlin the Ukraine Recovery Conference, which is really great. Like all these countries getting together, how can we help Ukraine rebuild itself? But the frustration is, here's $50 billion to rebuild. Well, if you spent $10 billion a year ago, then you would have had air defense systems, like 10 Patriot systems for $10 billion, meant that you wouldn't be spending $50 billion rebuilding the stuff that's blown up because you didn't have the Patriot system. So I think now there's this realization that, do you know what, there's maybe some missed opportunities for proper investment. And by that I mean, investing in air defense. And I think now, it's too late, but better now than never, right? The Patriots are on the cards.
Yeah. And you can open a whole big can of worms there, and I will not speak as a Ukrainian, I will speak as somebody who works a lot inside Ukraine and have spent over half of my life working in that nation. Like, I struggle, honestly. Okay, can I just tell you the truth, JP?
Please do.
Okay. The nation is at war, and the nation is fighting for its very survival.
Mm-hmm.
And many times I watch people talk on YouTube and other channels. I listen to a lot of stuff, and they will start to compare to Georgia and Abkhazia and all of, and with all due respect, I understand that the Georgian situation and and their sovereignty, and then Abkhazia, but in the big picture, we're talking about very tiny places. We're talking about the nation of Ukraine, which, if it's in Europe, is either the largest or the second largest territorial. It's got the most powerful nuclear power plant in all of Europe. When Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant is finished, it will be the most powerful because the reactors are even stronger. You're talking about an infrastructure of not only grain and sunflowers to feed the world, you also have the most vast deposits of oil, coal, natural gas in the West that is enough to run Europe for 300 years. Look it up. It's completely different. And
you've got lithium as well. Like Europe's
got it all,
lithium
brother.
Deposits, like all sorts.
Why do you think the town Solidar, the Russian word salt, and same in Ukrainian, basically soil, but salt. Okay, so you've got all these resources. You have wonderful people. You've got a resource of some of the most creative minds, technically, that it's unbelievable what a Ukrainian can do. I'm just telling you. And you know it, you've seen it. So you have all of this, and why we struggle to push the proper support, the proper channels, the proper narratives to sustain this nation and assist them in their fight for freedom. Sometimes, to me, I do not understand. But at the same time, I personally also struggle, and I could be wrong, so I'll watch the chat. They might get on me on this one. Like, you're fighting for your survival. The Ukrainian national football team, the value of their players' salaries is enough to buy, I can't remember how many F-16s, and it's X amount more even than Romania and other European teams. I just don't understand sometimes why they're not doing a better job of allocating full resources. And I'm not saying cancel the football team, but I'm saying you're not going to have a nation to have a football team if we all do not come together. Every city, every town, every mayor, every village, every governor, every piece of Ukraine must stand together. And it's better now than it was. Please don't misunderstand me. It's better now. The corruption is being hit smack in the face. Unity is coming at new levels constantly, and it's good. But I just wish there was more of that. So I hope folks understand that. And I saw that their chat, I think YouTube itself is having issues. Like my back end, I can't see my back end, and I'm assuming everything's going okay.
Yeah. Just refresh if you're in any doubt, guys. Yeah, I mean, there's so much rich conversational stimulus there, because I've often thought about the idea of, like, how much do you support society against how much you support the war effort, because one is contingent upon the other. But then also, if you don't have society at all, then what are you fighting for? And then, you know, there's the economy that generates, and the tax revenues that also support the war. And so there must be a sweet spot, but it's one of these things that's possibly impossible to know. And then I'm just left going, oh, but you should put more money into that. And then I'm thinking, no, so yeah, it's just very difficult. What are you laughing at?
I'm laughing because I knew somebody was going to say that, and it's somebody in your chat actually. He says I can't see my back end either, so I get that. I knew that was coming, and I do see the pluses. I will tell you guys, I do see like chats doing goofy. So mods are not deleting chats. None of that's happening. There's just something goofy going on.
Zhenya and Paul Guda Deberitz in the same chat. As you and I and Greg particularly, but if the chat is bombed, who will run Greg Terry World? Oh my goodness, nobody do virtual bombing.
No, please don't.
But there you go. On electricity, how much affects society depends on how planned the outages, how the planned outages are managed. Ukraine needs alternative resources as well. I was saying I'm long time been a big advocate of alternative energy and renewables and whatnot. And I know this is not the answer, but I also know that because you need huge production of equipment that requires massive like core energy. But in terms of like people surviving, there's a lot to be said about generators getting out there, and the EU and lots of countries have been providing generators. But also somebody was talking to me about some charities that are providing lots of solar power, like mobile solar power and stuff like that, which is great. You know, what you want to do is diversify your energy portfolio so that people aren't drawing from the main grid, and then the economy can get on with drawing from the main grid, and people themselves can be somewhat more self-dependent, but independent.
Yeah.
But it's easier said than done, right?
No, I'll tell you what. I don't know if we ever took you by them. Because I'm sure you would remember if we did, but there are some massive solar farms scattered throughout Ukraine. But yeah, everything will help. And Ukraine does push for alternative sources, but you know, such an easy target, to be quite honest. I'm talking about hectares and hectares and hectares of solar panels. And some of those are near some very frontline positions, and I'm just shocked why they haven't been taken out. There's Zhenya. Now, I will tell you this. Okay, guys, are you ready for a propaganda update? Johnny, you want a propaganda update?
Yep.
Okay.
Before you go on, I'm going to just crack open my Guinness, but it's
okay.
It's a alcohol-free one, and I've got my Austrian mug here, which is kind of weird because Austria are doing the square root of NAFL to help Ukraine in the main. I'm not entirely, actually, through the EU they do, but as a neutral country.
Well, let me. If you want to do that, then I will tell you. I am partaking right now of Bubbly sparkling water, but it is a pineapple flavor with other natural flavors because it's 91 degrees here at my house and about 90% humidity. It's very warm today, and when our stream is completed, I will be heading to the gym, which is outside CrossFit with my son, and I'm going to be sweating, so I'm hydrating right now and preparing. Now, the propaganda update, this goes along with what you were saying, talking about generators. So, for about 48 hours, okay, Ukraine social media has been pounded with the statements that there were going to be fines for noise violations of outdoor generators running if you broke the noise limit. Okay, now, many times, Zhenya, when you have significant power outages, especially like if you're in a large city like Kyiv, you hear it. The buildings are trying to function, the businesses, banks, specifically banks. There's always big generators outside banks to make sure they're running. So about 48 hours for the last couple of days, this has been going everywhere in social media, and people were worried about it. Well, I can't run my generator. I'm going to get fined. Da, 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 da. Ukraine came out today and says, listen, That is not us. That is propaganda. There are no noise violations. You will not be fined. We are on martial law and a war status. There is no noise violation for generators. So people will then go, well, where did that come from? Well, it came from propaganda. It starts, and whether it's Russia or others that are sympathetic to that, they begin to push that and push it and push it. But Ukraine came out today and says, okay, it's all lies. So Ukraine is doing everything they can to keep the lights on for their people, which is great.
Yeah. And absolutely necessary there. So just going back to talk about NATO and the US here, because this is my viewers will know this is a subject I talk about quite a lot. Okay, I find this interesting. So it was interesting that Biden says he does not want NATO controlling the West's response to Ukraine. I suppose that means he wants the US to dominate. Not sure why. So this is a really interesting topic of discussion, I think, and maybe speculation from me, but from a kind of Trumpian isolationist position, you often hear the idea that Europe needs to pay more for NATO. Now, remember, you're not paying for NATO, you're paying into your own defense. You're not buying something, and it's not like the US is paying more for this thing. Although in the long run, if they are paying more for their own defense, then they are doing the heavy lifting in terms of when NATO are called into action, because their defense provision is much greater than other NATO nations. But in general, you're not paying for something really. Okay. The idea, though, from the isolationist position is that Europe needs to pay more. European NATO nations need to pay more for their defense. The flip side, and then it's fairer, right? But the flip side of that is, as it stands, the US is a dominating force inside NATO. And so NATO is, to some degree, dictated by what the US wants. I mean, it's a kind of a US project, arguably, to a large degree anyway, historically. And so the more that Europe stands up on its own 2 feet, pays more for its defense, then the more independent it becomes from the US, and its defense industries become funded by that money that they're spending, because a new defense strategy from the EU says 60% of defense spending needs to stay inside the EU, whereas before 80% of it went to the US in buying their equipment. So the more the US might, or some people in the US, demand that Europe stands on its own 2 feet, the more Europe becomes independent of the US and doesn't need the US, and the more they are a fairer player inside NATO and get to dictate to the US what happens with NATO. So on the one hand, yes, that's great. They become independent, they spend more. But on the other hand, you lose power. And so I'm not saying either is better or worse. I'm 50-50. I don't really know. But there are ramifications for demanding that the EU pay more, or Europe pays more, and the US steps back. So, and I think that's a really great example. I'm sorry to speak so much, but it's a really great example that if the US has said, we want to keep in control of Ramstein and a contact group and not NATO, then that is an example of the US wanting to be strategically in charge of this thing.
I wouldn't disagree with that at all, Johnny. I think that's fair statement analysis. I do think I'm watching.
But Europe should have spent a lot more on defense.
Absolutely, Europe should have spent more. Yeah. Okay, but I know we have I have lots of European, and of course you're there in UK. But right now Europe's taking the lead. US is starting to catch up a little bit after our furlough, that we'll call it. But I'm very concerned internally, politically in my own nation. Johnny, to be quite honest, I have no idea what's going to happen in my nation come November.
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about it. We are fighting over here for democracy, and we are for freedom. We are fighting against a absolute cultish dictator who is the most narcissistic piece of crap on the planet. I'm letting my hair down today because I'm on here with you. It's just,
yeah. I mean,
okay. When you speak English, and I know you speak the Queen's English, but when you speak redneck American English like I do, okay, and then you read the messages, or you see the tweets, or you listen to the interview, or you watch the video, we can read between the lines.
Yeah.
Okay. And that doesn't mean other English speakers can. Of course you can. But when you're an American and you're hearing some of the things that this group is saying, you can read between the lines, and it's pure evil. It's pure evil. For example, the Father's Day message. He just takes one top, and we're getting off this guy, but it's just nothing but pure evil. It's vile, and it's all about me. It's all about me. Okay, right now, whether it's U.S., and back to your comment there, U.S. with NATO support or U.S. with controlling Rammstein, U.S. doing this, however we can get more support to Ukraine, however we can do that, I'm all for. Okay? That's it. But I will tell you this. If we do not have enough sense in those that really have the power and the leadership and the understanding to recognize that if we allow Ukraine to lose this war because we didn't step up as the rest of the civilized world, then we are going to pay a huge price for that in the years to come.
100%.
And right now, at the same time, we are seeing an expansion of the war in Israel. Now we're talking about the possibilities, and I do a lot of work with Israel. I talk with guys that are from Mossad, that are friends of mine. And the truth is, guys, and we're not here to talk about Israel and Palestine and Gaza and all of that. But the fact is, we're on the edge of a significant escalation there with Hezbollah. And if
he's
that happens,
dissolved the war cabinet. I mean,
correct. We have a mess going on, and the world needs to stand up. Those that are of rational thought and sanity need to recognize we need to stabilize this planet.
Completely. And I get in trouble. Some people who still are massively supportive of Trump, and I'm like, I don't know how you can be a supporter of Trump and support Ukraine, or at least you can be a supporter of Trump but understand that Trump isn't going to help Ukraine. You can be a fan of Trump for all these other reasons, but he won't help Ukraine. Like just what you said yesterday, the Mickey taking out of Zelensky of being the best salesman in the world and that he'll stop aid to Ukraine before he gets in. How do you reconcile that with saying that he's going to be the best choice for Ukraine when you've got someone that's saying, I'm basically anti-Ukraine. And when you look at all the things he said about Putin, like copy and paste everything that Trump has said about Putin, Ukraine, North Korea, China, right? Copy and paste it onto a Word document and read it to yourself. And then tell me who he's going to be supportive of when he gets in
he's going to support himself, not Ukraine, Johnny.
Yes,
he's going to support himself. Okay.
He said he will cease aid to Ukraine before he gets into office, right? So if you still think he's going to be the best person for Ukraine, then we can't speak the same language here. Anyway, sorry, that's enough of that.
Correct. You know, we need to give an announcement right now. Everybody listening here on or watching on my channel and on Johnny's channel, our moderators are not deleting your comments. We are not deleting your comments. Something is very wacky with YouTube. I cannot even see my back end. And I'm not talking about my derriere. I'm talking about the backside of YouTube where I can watch everything like super chats and thanks and your chats, and I can look at it in real time. I can't see anything right now other than Johnny's bald head. That's all I can see.
And what a beautiful bald head it is.
We're sorry, but it's not us. So something's going on YouTube side.
On that general consensus or gen consensus, 4,000 convicts volunteered, but most were rejected for medical reasons. I hadn't heard that. They were not fit enough, so less than 1,000 in training. I've heard today the announcement was 2,750 in training. So I would possibly disagree with that, but then we can call these numbers into question. But I'm aware that there's more than that. But it could be. It wouldn't surprise me that a lot of people didn't get through medical at all.
For sure. Listen, I know Zhenya's in here, so he can confirm all this, but I've been in Ukrainian prisons, many of them, and they're tough. So it would be a little challenging to go straight from there to physical training. I'm just telling you. So there may need some rehabilitation to be quite, and that's not a knock on the system. I'm just saying they're tough. They're tough.
This is interesting. G7, again, gender consensus. G7 summit was far more meaningful and produced far greater results for Ukraine than the peace summit. Ukraine got US security agreements and a $50 billion loan. Yes and no. So one wasn't designed to give aid to Ukraine, right? So the peace summit was actually really useful in seeing, my guess, my reading between the lines is the peace summit has got 80 countries from around the world together and 8 organizations in a way that G7 didn't. G7 gets 7 countries together and they were like, right, how can we support Ukraine? Whereas a peace summit was designed to actually give a pathway towards support, but also to get the lay of the land with regard to the global south, to many of these other countries that don't feature. And there would have been an absolute ton of networking going on, and also you get to learn who isn't on side. So when there were, it was more than 80 countries, it was however many countries, but 80 signed it, and then 2, Iraq and Jordan,
they backed out.
They backed out. But that tells you something. So there's an awful lot that it gets learned from this, and the intelligence agencies will be poring over this as well. You know, these are rich. There's rich, fertile grounds here for interaction, for networking, but also for understanding the lay of the international land. So I think both would have been exceptionally useful, but for different reasons.
I would say this. I agree with you. My community, a couple of weeks ago, educated me, and I'm always reading the chat and wanting to learn, and we're very interactive. So some of the issues that they talked about and the talking points were Ukraine and the IAEA coming into control of Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Okay, that's good. Talking about it. Number 2, food security and merchant shipping. That's good. Talking about it, making awareness.
Yeah.
Seaport access for the Black and Azov Seas. That's good. Needs to be talked about and shared, and maybe other nations learn stuff they do not know. POWs, talking about that, both sides, everybody being released. Okay, good. And then bringing to light the issue that Russia has stolen so many children and that they need to be returned. I just put a short video out on that, not a short, but a sideways short, 5 minutes with the update telling one story of a kid. It's very good. Just giving awareness of what children are dealing with. So these are all good.
Props to Canada, who are taking the lead on the coalition for the children there. So that's
my concern is that the Southern Hemisphere basically is not even aware there's a war going on. In general, I know it's a blanket statement, but in general, India, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, whom Zelensky went to visit to garner the support, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Thailand, UAE, attended but did not sign. Brazil was there as an observer.
So some of the interesting part about that, it's BRICS, directly BRICS, as in Brazil, obviously Russia, India, China,
the new member, Thailand,
all of those. But then you've got Thailand and Saudi Arabia are a prospective member as well. Now, I don't understand so much Mexico, especially with the new leader. Don't know what's going on there. Who knows?
Okay, I can answer that for you.
Mexico
John.
and US, maybe.
Listen, no, I can answer that for you. I hope. My daughter lived in Mexico for a year. My daughter is in Guatemala right now, where we have our finger pretty good on the pulse of Latin America. We do lots of work down there. I hope this is not a blanket statement, but in general, Mexico doesn't care.
Yeah.
I'm just serious. Ukraine doesn't affect Mexico at all.
Some people are talking about the relationship with America maybe determining something to do with that. I don't know.
I think right now Mexico is watching the American election.
Can I just say, this is a bit of spamming here, mate. But I've written with my mate Andy Lonergan. We have co-authored a series of books. We've written 2 of them, Curse of Maya and Grease Lightning. And one of them, this Curse of the Maya, is set in Guatemala. It's used as a set text in British schools, actually, for the teaching of the Mayan the Maya civilization. So yeah, if anyone wants to grab that, it's a nice little novel, especially if you've got kids, I guess between maybe 9 and 15 or something like that, but also adults as well. There you go, The Curse of the Maya. Nice little book for you. Anyway, that's
you know what I say to that? This is a world-renowned author here, Johnny Pearce, and if you don't believe me, you just hang around. He'll tell you that he is.
But yeah, I think so. That's Mexico, but there was Indonesia was another one that I think was added to a list of the ones that didn't sign. So again, it's about understanding who's on your side and who's not on your side. So it's something like the peace summit, like who turns up for a start tells you something, and then who signs a communique tells you something, and then who drops out because they're being had their arms twisted by Russia or China or something tells you something. So it's all very, very important, I think, information.
I will stick with my statement. I stand behind it completely, and this has nothing to do with the name. Okay, now we can talk about the name. Joe Biden, he should have been there. He should have been there. And he's the president of the United States of America, who potentially wants to have more control of what's happening through NATO and all of this stuff. He should have been there. He should not have been at a fundraiser with Julia Roberts and George Clooney. He should have been there, even if for one meeting, just to show up. And I know people have went, well, that brings an escalation. That does this, that does that. And it's not really about Biden per se, although he's the president. So it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see. I would have said the same thing, Johnny, if anybody had been the president. The office of the president of the United States should have been, we're talking about billions of dollars that we are sending in support.
Yeah. And
I should have been there.
Yeah, and I do understand that. And I'm a bit conflicted on this because I understand why he didn't turn up. So the explanation, not the justification, the explanation is that he figures that that's the biggest fundraising event for basically that is connected to the success or failure of his campaign, which is his existential future as leader.
If Ukraine loses the war and Russia takes it over, we're not going to be worried about who's the president of the United States. We're going to be worried about our survival.
Yeah, no, and I get that. I see both sides there, and I could understand the confliction. But you know, that's no great answer. It's just the real politics.
If it had been any president, I'm not picking on him.
No, I get that.
Because he's not my preference. I don't have a preference. Okay, but I'm just saying the sitting president. It could have been, Woodrow Wilson. I don't care.
Yeah. But what would have been best for Ukraine? What would have been best for Ukraine is that Biden would have been there, irrespective of anything else.
No question.
But what's best for Biden, in by point of fact that he won't get re-elected if he doesn't raise that money, is how they're kind of evaluating that. Is he does that and then he gets elected back in, and that's in the bigger picture better for Ukraine. So those are the two arguments. Now, I can understand people that sit on either side of that. I completely do. So
yeah, and Anna, I see your comment there, and I did listen to Kamala and Sullivan, and they did.
Someone's saying that they did okay. Actually.
They did a fine job. It's not about their ability to do the job. That has nothing to do with it.
Yeah,
the president and the leader of the free world should have been there. That's all I'm saying.
And I get that. I get that. Just to go back to a bit of a corrective. So I don't know, because what you said about football is actually, so I don't know if you understand it. With regard to football, national football teams are not paid to play, as far as I understand it. So their wages are paid by, they don't have central contracts. So in some sports,
I understand.
Like cricket,
I'm just reading the news in Ukrainian where they're boiling about it.
Yeah. So like they will pay an amount of money in order to physically get their team there and the kind of costs of being at a tournament. But what you could then argue is that puts Ukraine on the world stage, and people are talking about Ukraine. And so there's maybe a return on investment you can get from that. But as far as their wages are concerned,
and for me, it's not really about the football. It was just an example. It's in the Ukrainian news today. It's everywhere in the Ukrainian news. Okay. Yeah. My point being is I just think we need all hands on board right now.
Yeah.
To focus on winning this war. Every person possible globally. And in this thing, people are being killed every day. Every day.
Yeah. So a bit of a time for some super chats and whatnot. Papa Dutch, one of yours, hit like, see if this works. Papa Dutch.
Let me tell you something. That dude right there, Papa Dutch, is a major supporter of Ukraine. Your flag should be arriving, Papa. So thank you, sir.
Awesome stuff. And another one of yours, Papa Dutch, again, Murphy's Law of Communication, never run your mouth so long that people expect you to do it. I'm not sure what that's in relation to. But
I think that's in the Johnny Pearce. I'm pretty sure. especially when you pushed your own book there. By the way, it's an amazing book because it's at 4.5 stars, and I think I'm gonna grab it because I like that Mayan stuff. So I'm gonna do a read after Johnny.
Oh, good on you.
Yeah.
And Papa Dutch again. Look at it, the love he's given. Feel happy. I feel happy here. Good on you, mate.
Awesome, man.
And Petra, also one of yours.
Let me tell the story. Let me tell the story behind that for your community. So you see the Swedish krone there, 129. Petra quit smoking, and the money that she would put towards smoking, she now uses it to support Ukraine.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a really good story.
On you, Petra. James Cowley, 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you very much. James, really, really kind. Papa Dutch, why does it seem that both the Red Cross and NATO are about as helpful as teats on a male dog?
You are correct.
Probably got a good insight into
well,
them.
I've shown, Papa Dutch knows, I've shown videos, and I'm sure here in a few weeks I'll be showing more. Honestly, they do very little to nothing, and it's just a fact. It's just a fact.
As T. Nurka adds in there, yeah, they do. So UN Red Cross, UNHCR.
Ooh, that's exactly right there.
Mostly flashes of cash and vehicles
that's
in front
exactly
of cameras
right.
and then leave.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
They're good at that too.
One of yours, IBAG M. I love all Ukrainian warriors and supporters. Thanks to Tom Marnie, one of my members there, member for 7 months. Von Rees, thank you so much. Remember the stolen children, pray they were not sold to sex slavers. I don't know what's going on there. It's one of those subjects that I don't report enough on. Is the children who have gone through filtration camps being essentially stolen by Russia? And I mean, there were orphanages that were in occupied areas that they just shipped all those children off to be adopted in Russia, and then other situations as well. So yeah, it's all
I did do a video on that, and I'm going to be doing more. I'm doing some research on it because I want to portray the reality of it, and the reality is it's a disaster what's happening with a lot of Ukrainian children, and we need more awareness of that. So we're going to all work together to push that out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Von Rees. Papa Dutch restated properly, the Red Cross and the UN are about as useful as a bucket with no one to carry it.
It's pure redneck Americana. I love it.
But I can think of a time when just a bucket with stuff in would be quite useful, and I wouldn't need to carry it. But
I've got news for you. My great-grandma in the hills of Virginia growing up, and she died in 1996, extremely old. And in her home, she never had running water. She never had electricity. She carried a double-barrel 12-gauge shotgun around. She looked like Granny on the Beverly Hillbillies. She chewed tobacco. She drank corn mash whiskey that she made in the backwoods down below her house. You had to walk down to the spring to get 2 buckets of water. That's how you got water. But I can tell you this thing. In the winter, you were happy to have that bucket, so you didn't have to go to the outhouse. There's a good time for a bucket.
Yep. I almost thought I was in as an extra in Deliverance or something there, but interesting. So just a few more. Thanks to Rick, who's a great member of the community. Thanks for all your great updates, Jonathan. No, thank you for being there, and thank you for your super stickers. Really incredibly generous. And Wayne Metcalf gifted 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you very much, Wayne. Really, really kind. So before we go,
you should have in there.
There's more to come. But
okay, cool. We'll get to them.
Yeah. Greg and Jonathan back together makes me nostalgic for the videos you used to film in the back of the battle bus in Ukraine. Oh, happy days! And I've still got my 3rd video of my trip that I've been so busy recently. I just like 24/7, and I have to say thank you, Greg. So I went and gave a talk just recently up in north of my county, and it was lovely to have 50 people who come from different sides of the country to come and see someone bang on about Ukraine. And it just goes to show how this can affect people, and how, on an individual level, this is very much a moral calculation. Why we support Ukraine is a moral calculation. Why our state supports Ukraine is a strategic calculation that just happens to align with morality. But actually, I argue that the UK, the US, EU, are supporting Ukraine and should support Ukraine for very much different reasons that we support Ukraine. They support Ukraine because it's in their best interest strategically, economically, security, with information warfare, etc., etc. But it was wonderful to sit there. You've got your notes there. Actually, one thing that Mark, who one of the organisers, said, "It's really impressed you just did that." You know me, I could bang on for England, and so yeah, I talked without notes, and it was just a stream of consciousness splurge to the audience. But hopefully, it was appreciated, and it was just lovely to be able to share my views, even though my views are pretty much that we're in World War III, and that was the thesis of my talk, and that the sooner we kind of realise that, the better we are able to vote correctly in accordance with the idea that we're in World War III, and the better able we are to understand what's going on around us. I think there's a lot of people who are deeply ignorant, and not in a pejorative sense, just in people have things to do, right? They've got lives to lead, and actually what's going on in Ukraine isn't important to them, but it should be important to them, because actually everything's connected. It's just so much of this world is connected in ways that we don't properly understand. And I spoke a lot about disinformation and the challenges of disinformation that you've already mentioned today, Greg, by point of fact that, you know, there's a big bit of disinformation flying around Ukraine at the moment with regard to generators, noises,
but they're fixing it. Mm-hmm.
And as Aaron Miller says, that's the wild thing about propaganda, though, because even if 10 to 20% of it sticks, it's still very harmful. Yep.
And here's the thing when it comes to propaganda. I'm actually going to have Phil Ittner on here, hopefully this week, and we're going to talk about the propaganda. The man, he knows. You have, let's just go with that last comment, 10 to 20% sticks. But the problem is when we allow time to layer it. So it's one thing about propaganda with one push, and no matter what the propaganda is. Okay, for us right now, maybe in this situation, we're talking about Russian propaganda filtering throughout the world, and we allow it. But when we allow it time over time over time over time, the layers begin to build on it, and that's where you get into real trouble, because at that point, the 10 to 20% can move up. And it's hard to pull back those layers of misinformation when you let so many layers build up. It's easier to deal with an issue. For example, generators. Okay, Ukraine jumped on it. That is fake news. That's coming from propaganda. Please run your generators. We're in a war. Okay, they fixed it. But if that story was allowed just to layer, then it's harder to peel it back over time. So that's why all of us need to be, you know, very concerted in our effort to battle against the propaganda. Tell it to your neighbors. Share. If you see a story and you're out at a cafe or you hear people talking, talk about it. This is where we have to make the difference and the change. And we are making a difference. Let's just work hard to make a bigger difference.
Sorry to return to the NATO. There's just a lot of NATO discussion going on and questions. Jen Consensus again says NATO actually does not do very much for Ukraine aid. Its decisions and contributions come from individual nations. NATO does not have a budget or weapons to send to Ukraine. Exactly right. So that's that whole idea that we don't pay for NATO. We pay maybe nominal amounts for administration and whatnot, but actually it's our defences that is what we're paying for. And then when we give aid to Ukraine, it's bilateral or through organizations such as the EU and whatnot. But in terms of what's interesting then is Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, has said that he is looking at getting $40 billion coming from NATO to Ukraine on a yearly basis, which is absolutely brilliant. But one would assume that that's forcing or getting member states to adopt to bilateral contributions that amount to 40 billion. So again, as you know, I think NATO is doing a lot, but it can't do more than, obviously, you know, when it doesn't have a budget of its own, then it's obviously going to be constrained.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there also NATO contractual obligations that these nations of the member states have to fulfill in regard to supply, in regard to what has to be where, and then they make adjustments on that?
Yeah.
Yes. And then so, you know, some of the equipment even earlier that was rotated through NATO nations into Ukraine, they had to wait for other pieces to come before they could push it. And the longer we let this war go on, and the more rhetoric that is out there, and the further the line of division comes between the New World Order, they call it, of Russia and China and Iran and others, North Korea, Vladimir Putin making the first trip over there in 20 years, upcoming, and that's a whole different topic. The bottom line, the longer we allow this divide to take place, in my opinion, I believe at that point, NATO will be even firmer on their grip to hold on to some stuff, because they have to protect their own nation. It's like Poland a few days ago, talking about, okay, we'll help you with some other air defense, but that Patriot needs to stay here because the missiles are flying too close to our people. We've already lost 2. We've already had 3 incursions during the war. These are the little things I think that just start to creep up, especially when you're dealing with NATO.
Yeah, so again, let's just stay on the NATO subject for a little bit, if you don't mind. So Bagheera says, how can Europe pay more if those NATO countries couldn't even spend 2% for defense? So trying to work out exactly where that's going, as in, you know, there are NATO countries that don't spend 2%. So here are the member states. There are, 32 states. I was under the impression that 18 of them were going to be paying 2% or more by the end of this year. Well, actually, Jens Stoltenberg has come out today and said that 20 NATO states will be spending more than 2%, which is great. I don't know exactly what those states are, but there will be countries like Iceland that don't have an army, right? And so it's quite difficult for them to spend 2% of their GDP on defense when, I don't know, should you argue then that they just need to have an army? I don't know. Luxembourg,
well, I can tell you right now, Johnny, Albania 0.08%, Belgium 2.0%, Bulgaria 0.35%, Canada 6.6%, Croatia 0.29%, Czech Republic 1.02%, and these are accurate numbers as of March 7, 2024.
Canada 6%.
Canada
6%. That can't be right, because the highest was Poland on sort of almost 4%. I last heard. I don't know if that. Yeah.
All right, hang on. I'm on the NATO site, so hang on. Keep talking.
That's just really interesting, because the highest used to be the US, then Poland.
Sorry, I'm on the cost share page.
Right.
Not GDP. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm on let me get to the GDP page. You can keep talking. You're
correct. Yeah. So there are some countries that are going to find it difficult really to do that, and in understandable ways. But then there are other countries, I think, you know, your Spain's and Portugal's, I think, or is Portugal there? I say that assuming Portugal are in NATO, but certainly Spain, Portugal there, and so there are a few other countries that I think are slacking.
Here you go. Poland's the biggest with 3.9%.
Yeah.
US 3.49, Greece 3.01, Estonia 2.73, Lithuania, Finland, Romania, Hungary, and Latvia. Those are the ones above 2%.
And the UK.
Sorry. Yes.
Yes.
UK.
And I think probably a few more. So I think there are, the idea being that they will be, or are in the middle of being. It's also a little bit difficult possibly to work this out. So this is something I've talked about before, which is that there are lots of things people are doing that are defense orientated to do to support Ukraine, but aren't probably included in defense spending, but are to do with supporting Ukraine in this war. And so people can criticize a country for not spending enough, but actually they're spending all this money on the welfare state to sort out refugees from Ukraine. And so, you know, you're beating a country with one stick, but actually they're doing better than countries who are spending more as a percentage of their GDP on defense to help Ukraine, just in other ways. Right. And, you know, where Germany, Poland, Hungary, even taking an awful lot of refugees, changing providing for education, providing for this and that. And then you've got lots of aid that goes to Ukraine that I'm not always sure gets put down as defense spending and then goes towards the 2%. So I think there's a lot of figures there's a lot of clarity that needs to come out of how we understand, but how we understand the figures. But I think the end result is there are certainly some countries that are shirking their responsibilities.
Yeah, and you know, you're going into the talking points of, well, let's wait and see. Let's wait and see. Yeah. But yes, it's NATO's a big topic, and I will tell you this. I just wish we were being a little bit stronger from the American side. I know we've done a lot, but just in general, a little bit more bull by the horns. We are the largest member.
And I would agree with that. I think there's this being scared of escalation, and I understand that. Again, it's not justification. I understand the anti-escalation. When you talk about nuclear war, this is the most serious thing you can talk about in human existence, right? In terms of like human actions that could end the world. Okay, so if you're going to be a little cautious about anything that we can possibly talk about now, it's going to be something to do with escalation concerning nuclear war, right? So there's that, but there's also this idea that we should be learning that Russia has no other option other than nuclear, and they're not going to do nuclear if you're just going to allow Ukraine to use ATACMS into Russia. So there is some much greater envelope pushing that the US could do. And even you don't, and part of the problem, and I'd be interested to see you get your views on this, Greg. Part of the problem is that too many of these conversations are happening in public. So my view would have been America should have just by default allowed them to use these weapons into Russia. No one has a discussion about it. Ukraine hits these things. They hit these air bases with ATACMS. And then it's not this thing about, oh, we will give you this at this point, and that's seen as an escalation because it's this discussion out in public. It's just what happens behind closed doors. You have permission to do that. It's done. Deal with it, Russia.
I would just say it this way, 2 points into what you just said there. The first one would be fear of escalation. Pretty much the way I see it, 51 years on the earth and just a lot of redneck wisdom is you're typically going to get what you fear. And the best way to not get what you fear is to take the bull by the horns and deal with it. But if you're going to fear escalation, you're probably going to get escalation. So the best way to deal with it is to fix it. And we fix that by supporting Ukraine on a huge level. Secondly, okay, let me ask you something. You ready for this?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Please do. Okay. You been to a Zoom?
I have.
Mm-hmm. Izum, guys,
I have borscht in Izum.
You did have borscht in Izum. Izum is a large city, about 100,000 pre-war, that is devastatingly destroyed. And it's nowhere near the front lines now. I mean, it's close to the front lines, but not 10 kilometers. It's destroyed horribly. If that happened to a city of that size in the UK, what would the UK do?
Yeah.
I mean, and the world would support the UK. I don't understand why. And I'm telling you, I'm getting ready to leave and head back to Ukraine. And I will tell you this, I'm going to make it a focus this time because now, this time around, the channel has grown, the footprint has grown, and I'm going to do my best to show even more the reality. And hopefully it just gets to the right people, because if that was happening to your hometown, guys, whatever nation you're in, if that was happening to your hometown, it's really bad, the destruction. It's indescribably bad. And you would be fully supported. And why Ukraine is not fully supported to absolutely level every military operation, every base, every barrack is beyond me.
I think that these sort of appeasers, say in the United States or any country really, I'm just going to use the US because it's obvious and whatnot, but appeasers in the country, just imagine if your home city was bombed. Like, would you sit back and go, okay, I need to just sue for peace now? Just exactly. I don't understand the mentality. David Sachs was banging on about this the other day, and just some of these people that just have such horrible, disgusting opinions that just imagine that was you. Would you accept other countries demanding that you sue for peace and give your like if you had invaders into your house and they were like, oh, I'm in a lounge now, I'm having a lounge, and then would you expect your neighbors to come around and say, you Greg, they've taken your lounge, I know they're taking your lounge, but you need to sue for peace now, just give them your lounge and maybe a bit of your kitchen, and then go and live upstairs? Do you know what I mean? Like, no. These are
Johnny,
people in my house.
I'm going to
get
tell
out my
you.
house.
I'm going to speaking about get out of my. I'm going to tell you a true story, and my wife can come on here and validate it. 2 days ago, we're in our front yard, in the road right there, and I hear this yelling, and they're on my dirt. You understand my dirt?
Yeah.
Okay, they're on my dirt, and this guy pulls his car over, and he is screaming the most vile language at this decent looking man and wife riding their bicycles, and they're on my dirt. And this guy gets out of the car and aggressively goes after those two. They're on my dirt. Okay. So the car passed and he was really close to the bicycle. So the guy on the bicycle just did like this, like, what are you doing? The guy stopped, got out, and wanted to start fighting on my dirt. So my wife and I are there in the yard. Oh, it was on then. I saw that the bicycle guy was fully carrying a pistol. Completely. I saw it right here on his hip. So I ran in and they're getting ready to go. I got in the middle of them. I said, here's the deal. You're not fighting on my dirt. This is my dirt. Now, I'll pop both of you, but you're not fighting on my dirt. So dirt means my yard. My dirt is my sovereign territory, the kingdom of Greg. Okay. So my borders, my dirt. And I said, you're not fighting here. And sir, you get in your car and go down the road. Sir, you and your wife get on the bike and you keep with your continual ride. And let's just be done with this. You guys want to get in a fight over nothing. This is stupid. And I started to go with then saying, there are people dying everywhere around this world having bombs dropped on their head, and you're fighting on my yard. I said, it's not happening. Not happening. Calm down. But it was my dirt. So I felt like the Lord of my manor. And I'm not going to let people, I mean, man, I could easily see, it's America. The guy on the bike had a pistol right on his belt. And this guy's screaming, and I'm going, okay, this guy's going to shoot this guy right in my yard. Not going to happen. So the same thing being, if what was happening in Ukraine was happening in your neighborhood and in your home and in your city and in your country, I don't care what your background is, what your political affiliation is, what your religious preference is, you would be fighting mad.
Yeah.
Because all of you are fighting mad now, and most of you in the chat or watching this later, you're not even in Ukraine because you have morality and a sense of humanity. And just imagine if this was your home. It'd be gloves off, man. Gloves off.
For sure. Yeah, it just blows up. You know, I get enraged enough about the war itself, but people who should know better justifying Russia's aggression, like from Western or otherwise allied nations, just blows my mind, just repeatedly. Thanks, Kevin Forst, for 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Again, your Papa Dutch YouTube doesn't want my obviously having issues with YouTube.
YouTube is messed up. Papa Dutch, thank you. Dunk on you 23. Johnny. Oh, yeah, that's my man there. Let me ask you a question. And he gifted 10 memberships as well. Thank you for that. Do you know what Dunk on you 23 represents?
This is
come on,
something to do with cricket, isn't it? No, obviously basketball.
And it is
Michael Jordan.
Yes, Johnny, you legend.
I only because you told me last time, but
remember.
I've got some memory left, not a lot. Random username 2004. Half of the time YouTube does not work anyways. This is true. And by the way,
it's really struggling today.
Yeah,
for some
and
reason.
he's given you two of those, or she. So it could be an issue there. And by the way, for people who complain about me deleting comments, I know I do have mods and sometimes they will delete comments, I'm sure, but I never delete comments really on my site. So it's YouTube randomly deletes whether you're for Ukraine, against Ukraine, for China, against China, for free speech, against free speech. YouTube deletes randomly large amounts of comments for no apparent reason, and it's really frustrating.
Johnny, I did delete one comment yesterday. So
sorry, I didn't mean it. Sorry.
I need to bare my soul, because I never do either, but I need to bare my soul. Somebody put a comment on one of my streams from last week and says, Greg is nothing but a Russian bot with the brain of a mosquito. I deleted that one.
What a bizarre thing to say.
I have no idea why.
Why would you call you a Russian bot?
I don't know, but I did delete that one because that one made me, I didn't even respond. I just said, okay, I'm deleting that one.
Thanks, Brian Ivy. Such a great supporter of the channel. Really appreciate you, mate. Mark Thompson, they're giving you some love there, Greg. And
no, that's you. That's you, Mark Thompson. I think. Oh, maybe I don't.
No, that's
okay.
you.
I don't
it's
see
got
the
a little link.
I can't see my back end. Thank you, Mark Thompson.
And another one for you. Another one for you. They know, you know, they exist. Says this is on a Pete's dedication and everyone helping to make Ukraine's weeks go better. Salute to Pete. I saw the vid post.
Yes, Pete is doing.
That's Pete the medic. For those who won't know.
Yeah, Pete's doing well. Pete is in a very, very difficult place right now, but doing well. Very busy, very active on the very front. He's rotationed on right now, so you guys remember Pete.
Lots of people talking about Swedish Gripens and the F-16. So the F-16s are going to Ukraine. There's an argument to say that more pilots should be trained, but there are very strict numbers of pilots to be trained because it's difficult. And again, I'm playing both sides here. So ideally, you train 1,000 Ukrainian pilots. Awesome. But the reality is, so say people having to go to the US, but I believe, my understanding is the US Air Force has a very strict kind of pilot training regime. And when you're trying to throw in another 12 pilots into F-16 training, when you already got to train your own, you know, the US has to have their own pilots trained up before Ukraine. So like that's more important to the US. Then you've got other nations that are coming along as well. So they've said, right, 12 pilots there, and then Romania, and then Denmark. But it's not like, oh, we can just fit more people in the classroom. You need, it's quite difficult to train pilots on F-16, I'd imagine. So you need simulator time, you need airframe time, you need it's not as easy as one might think, especially when you need the trainers, etc.
I stick by what I've said since January, and because we already knew September, and I've been saying it all year. And it's still, it's not even going to be September. So the pilot training at the earliest will end in September, and that's for the first batch of 12. It's such a complicated
That's interesting
system.
because there are others saying that sooner. I mean, one of the indications from Zelensky himself was kind of, it wasn't the word imminently, but it was something like that. So there are some who would say it's going to be summertime. A lot still saying summertime, but
Johnny, it's almost July, bro.
Yeah, this is true.
Keith Kane in the chat. Oh, somebody else in the chat. It went by very quickly because I'm watching Johnny's back end, and his back end is beautiful, by the way. That one right there, Keith Kane. Yes, sir. I emailed you, Keith, so I hope I got the right email address. If not, go to my website, hit contact, send me the message with your shipping address. Keith Kane won Battle Flag on our Saturday raffle, so big supporter of Ukraine there. So thank you, Keith. And then I saw some others in chat talking about their comments being deleted, guys. It's sorry, even on other days, it's YouTube. I promise you, we'll be having some goofy issues last few days.
Yeah. So on the Gripen thing, does Greg know anything about why Sweden needs to wait until the Gripen to give the Gripen to Ukraine when France can send Mirage? Seems like a better choice for the Gripen, easier to use, help protect the F-16. Okay.
You know the answer.
Well, no, I was just going to say, just to explain the question. So if you don't know, F-16s are being given, and there's all this kind of logistics, all these logistics being put in place. You've got the training of the pilots, but the training of the maintenance crew, the ground crews, getting the air bases ready, etc., etc., etc. And there was pressure from the F-16 providers on Sweden not to continue with their efforts to give Gripens to Ukraine, even though Ukraine wants Gripens and the F-16. So this is not Ukraine asking. This appears to be the F-16 providers asking. But then France came along and said, kind of unilaterally, we're going to give a bunch of Mirage, which then makes people go, well, hang on, well, how can they're saying no to F-16s, but you said yes to Mirage? So that's
well, this is one of those things, and I just suggest everyone wait and see. Johnny answered correctly on the Gripen there. The Mirages, the training, they're going to try to expedite that by the end of the year. But I just know this from experience talking to the guys and dealing with the people that tell us like the truth. It's not easy. Okay, first of all, they want the efforts going to the F-16 to get those pilots as ready as possible, because it's much more difficult than people think. You just don't get in the airplane and fly it.
Yeah.
Okay. And as Johnny said, the full infrastructure. It's really helpful when pilots have no knowledge of MiG systems or SU systems. It's easier to train them. So it's very, very complicated to train the pilots. You talk about you're training a pilot to fight in a war, not go on training runs. It's not like we're going to train them and now they're going on their practice runs. No, they're being trained and going straight to phase 1 of World War III. And they're going to deal with air defense. They're going to deal with Russian fighters. They're going to deal with everything. You're just not putting these planes in the air. And then, of course, you come to the infrastructure. And you guys are watching. Starter Konstantinov is being hit regularly now.
Yeah, so just to let people know where that is. So what Greg's talking about is the airbase in Khmelnytsky. That is the site of where the airbase where the Su-24Ms that use the that fire the cruise missiles, particularly. There'll be other airframes flying from there. I presume that's there. That airbase there, if I'm right.
You're right.
So that's one. So that is being hit or at least targeted so often, and one presumes also hit because there's some showers will be getting through.
It's being hit,
and that's where people are thinking the F-16s are going to be placed. So it is definitely like target number 1 for the Russians, and you can see that like evidently.
Yeah.
So let's quickly go to the map then.
Let's do it.
I guess we won't have too long to spend on this. There are lots of pins.
Let's do the map, and then there's some more super chats and thank yous, and let's do the map.
So there are lots of pins on this map, and the reason there are lots of pins is because for those who know my mapping here, I don't know if that's better to do it that way. Yeah, this is a synthesis of 3 maps, and one of the mappers is a Russian mapper called Suryat Maps that is in red here, and these dark blue and dark red pins correspond to Suryat Maps, and they have not been mapping for 13 days now. They've just come back to start mapping, and so there are lots of changes. And JR did the mapping update today, and there will be a bit of like adding on what's been happening over some time. So it's not that last 24 hours has suddenly seen a massive attack right across the front line. So just have to give you that as a bit of a caveat. Although there have been it seems quite a few places that flared up, as according to Suryat Maps too. Okay, so we'll start in the northern area in the Kharkiv Oblast, where the Russians have been attacking down into Kharkiv from Belgorod Oblast, and this has been a scene of probably the most good news for Ukraine recently. Greg, I'm sure you'd agree.
I completely agree with that. Ukraine has stabilized that area and even made some counterpunches.
Yeah, and you can see here some blue. So the light blue is Andrew Perpetua's map that shows that Ukrainians, although it very much differs with Suryat Maps, who has a Russian defensive line here further to the south of Lyobikay, than Andrew Perpetua, who has a Russian line pushed even further back into this settlement Lyobikay there, whereas Suryat Maps has the Russians being pushed back but much further forward there. But I would trust Andrew Perpetua here definitely more than Suryat Maps in this case. And Andrew was saying in his live stream recently that there's more good news from these areas than people realize. There's quite a bit of operational security, and he thinks that the Ukrainians are actually doing, and he's a bit of a doomer sometimes, Andrew, so he'll tell you how it is, but he said that actually the Ukrainians are doing quite well in this area, more than we would realize. But he also said that this is creating a bit of an issue because and I don't know if you've heard this, but you've got morale down on the eastern line for the Ukrainians is struggling because everyone's talking about the north, and everyone in the north is getting the equipment, and actually people in the east are not as high in morale as those.
I can confirm all that, and I'll explain it to you now. So, or I'll give you my 2 cents on it.
Yeah.
Ukraine had to stop the advance north of Kharkiv.
Yep. Agreed.
Multiple professional level units were rotated from the south and the east to support that area. That's a fact. I don't care what you read. I don't care what you hear. They're there. And they've done a phenomenal job. They now also have supply. Why did that have to be stopped? It had to be stopped. Vladimir Putin said it himself in a speech the other day that I translated. He wants to shell Kharkiv to oblivion. And to do that, they have to get a few more kilometers down below Lipsy. That is why Ukraine knew they had to stop this no matter the cost. Because Ukraine cannot lose Kharkiv. It's the second largest city. It's economic monstrosity and a beautiful city. It's one of my favorite cities, Kharkiv and Kherson. Even though my home city is Khmelnytsky, that was non-negotiable. Ukraine had to stop that incursion, push, minor offensive, whatever you want to call it. So they've done it. Congratulations. We needed that. It's positive. We're also making some push up in the Lugansk Oblast up there in the north. That's all good.
So, here is actually a rejigging of the mapping where Suryat map has shown is all to do the Oscar rig, but he's just changed his map. But that's more of a rejig. But just adding that.
Here is where the problem is. From Seversk down, it's tough. All the way along the remaining pieces of the front line, and we have 3 trouble areas. One we know of, the city's becoming famous like a Bakhmut, which is Chasiv Yar, and that's just going to be a continued battleground there. But our 2 major problems are the Ocherny line and Karakova, and the morale there is lower because they are vitally important places strategically for Ukraine, and they have to be held. We are now in danger zone of the road, the curve in the road, I call it, outside of Ocherny. We're down to about 7 kilometers. Russia is from that road. We have to hold that road.
Yeah. And yeah, I was gonna.
You know what I'm talking about there as well. I'm
this
sure.
Road, this road there.
Yes, the curve. I call it the curve in the road and the intersection.
Yeah, so they are moving towards there. I mean, there is a bit of there are some water features to consider around there, but they are inching closer, and they're probably going to get fire control. I mean, they technically should have it already, but it depends where they put their artillery.
Well, I can tell you they have fire control. So Johnny,
or can hit it, yeah.
Listen, you've been on that road, sir. You may or may not know it, but you've been on that road. So now that road is not permitted.
Yeah.
So there's your answer. It's too dangerous. Now they don't control it, but they're hitting it much more often. And the closer they get, of course, the more they will be able to do that. And that is a major thoroughfare there. And the other town that we have to really pay attention to is Karakova there. Yep. The push there coming up.
The push from a number of different places. So before we get there, let's go just back up to Kharkiv and look at this Vovchansk area, which is, okay, first of all, to the west of that sector, the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back again, which is fantastic. Really good news there. We have some gains to the west of Staritsya there. So that's good news. And then we have this area in the middle of Vovchansk. Now, that red pin. Don't worry too much about that. It's your Suriyat map showing that they control this area, but actually they are cut off there. And I presume there's been lots of talk about that you might have been privy to, Greg, with regard to the surrounded 400, possibly 400 troops, many wounded. That could be good news. That is for the Ukrainians, but they are hammering that with their hammer-guided glide bombs, the Ukrainians. That's going to be horrible for the Russians to be there. They can't get out. They can't get a bridge over to that. That's the last I've heard. I haven't heard anything else about that.
We'll get more clarity on that. That's one of those ones you just wait and see. We'll get some strong clarity on it. But we've got positive things happening up here.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's all good. That's a good news area for Ukraine. Then we come down to the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. There are these areas. I'm not really going to talk too much about them. We'll see it settle down tomorrow. This is going to be mapping changes and also Suriyat maps claiming lots of things happening. Don't know how much is actually going on.
We've had a little positive movement in this Serebryantsk, just north of Siversk.
Yes. That's what I was going to come down to. We've got some yellow pins there, but just to say there is fighting going on potentially up and down there. But the good news, the second area of good news for the Ukrainians is in the middle of the Serebryantsk forest, where both mappers, Deep State Map and Suriyat Maps here, admitting, and I'll look at this source just to give you an indication, the armed forces of Ukraine still managed to make significant progress in the Serebryantsk forest, reaching the mass grave. This is, I don't know what that is, but the advance is very significant and important in further military operations in the Kremensk forest. And another small advance so this one's slightly downplaying it a little bit, small advance confirmed by the Institute for the Study of War in the Serebryantsk forest. So people seem to confirm that, or be on the same page that the Ukrainians have had some success in the forest, which is not that much of a forest in many of these areas. Many of these trees have been stripped of foliage, and it's really sad to see.
Oh, they're not only stripped of foliage. Over the last 10 days, we've had severe fires in the Serebryantsk forest. And so that it does not look like a forest now, guys. It is many trees are sheared off, many burnt to the ground. It just depends on the specific region there, of course, which we can't know unless we're flying a live drone overhead. But it doesn't look like a forest now. It looks like an apocalyptic scene. But fortunately, Ukraine making some very much needed gains right there.
Yeah, and it's so sad. I mean, you have a fire starting there. You're not going to get the fire surface, and they're putting that out. That's for sure. So
no,
so that's good news.
It's ecological disaster as well. I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah,
for the world.
Makes me sad. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it all makes me sad. So Suriyat Map seems to think that the Russians have way more control in the Bilateral area than the other mappers. They include the entire chalk pit now. I just don't think this is true. I think that would be really difficult for the Russians. Sorry, I may have said Ukrainians. The Russians to control this whole area, considering the difficulty of the topography here. This is all in a dip. You've got high ground here, high ground there. The Ukrainians have got good sighting of the Russians. They've tried for a long time to move through Bilateral. I don't know that that's true, but you might have confirmation that it is. The other mappers don't seem to think it is.
Regardless, I mean, such a brutal territory there with ravines, and it's not easy territory at all. So I don't think anybody's going to move here, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So I'd say that's doubtful of a Russian game.
Agreed.
You never know, especially of that kind of size as well. It's not.
It's massive.
When you've been fighting over that for like a year,
exactly,
and then suddenly they take all that. You're thinking, no, probably not. Now I'd be interested to see what you think about Chasiv Yar. So, okay, before we get to Chasiv Yar, this area of Siversk seems to be quite active towards
the south side.
And around Rozdalivka area. So that's been fairly active all along there for a good few weeks now.
We've got friends fighting on that line, and it is tough there.
So yeah, I assume the Russians might well have made some gains. Now, Chasiv Yar is interesting. Okay, so Suriyat Maps has come back on the scene to map again after 13 days off and has taken this area off. Now, Suriyat Maps has a tendency to say whatever the Russian MOD say. And as soon as the Russian MOD say something, then they map it. As soon as there's a Russian IFV or infantryman's foot in a place, they say Russia controls that. And of course, what's happening is the Russians are attacking, getting repelled, going back to where they started, attacking, getting repelled. And then eventually they might take that area, but it might be like 5 days later. But often they don't control these areas. These are gray zones that the Russians have attacked, and then as soon as possible, Surat Mats will mark it as Russian control. This is one example. So there are 3 areas of attack into Chasiv Yar, which is to the west of Bakhmut. You've got the Bodanivka coming down through that village of Bodanivka into a village called Kalinivka here before you get to the canal. Then you've got the canal micro district, which is to the east of the canal that comes down here, that's fighting in that area. And then you get the third area, which was originally through Ivanivska along the T0504 highway. You have some forestry here, which is a nature reserve that the Russians have possibly got up to. They have definitely been there. In fact, they've got across there and attacked in this forestry area, but they were repelled and they lost quite a lot because there are no roads here. You can't use vehicles easily, and there aren't even very many trenches as far as I understand it, so you can't take ground easily and hold it. It's just open forestry, and they got in there, tried to attack the actual Chasiv Yar, and then got cut off, and it didn't go very well for the Russians. But there are differing claims as to how the Russians are doing. First of all, we go back up here to Bodanivka into Kalinivka. I'm going to show you something that I think is important here for understanding what the lay of the land is around here, which is we have these culverts, which are basically tunnels that the canal goes under, which means both here and here, there's no surprise that these are the 2 areas that Russia are attacking, north and south of the canal microdistrict, is because technically they can get across the canal more easily. And they have indeed done that and then been repelled. But this is where the fighting is. What's your understanding of how it's going in Chasiv Yar at the moment?
My understanding, so first of all, guys, I've been in Chasiv Yar. I've supplied Chasiv Yar. It's a very small town. It's very important, but it's destroyed, and Ukraine is doing an amazing job to hold it.
But it's also pretty well defended, right?
It is well defended.
Had a long time
it is well defended, and it's just a slow grind there. You know, Chasiv Yar is not my concern at all. You asked how I think it's going there.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is Ukraine could even lose Chasiv Yar temporarily. It wouldn't affect them at all right now because they're behind that's extremely fortified. I'm much deeper concerned down south with Ocherny and Karakova.
Fair enough.
Chasiv Yar is Ukraine's. They're holding it. They're holding it. It's destroyed. They're doing a good job.
And this was a place that the Ukrainians themselves, I mean, you've spoken to battalion commanders there that said, we're looking at losing this by the end of summer. And actually you could now, I mean, they've done such a good job, and it could be, my opinion is that the Russians made a really ridiculous mistake in sending 50,000 people to attack Kharkiv and thinking they would divert all these troops away, and then ending up losing a lot of troops and having to divert some of their own troops. I think that they would have been better off to shoving 50,000 troops into Chasiv Yar, and they would have achieved far more. But there you go, that's the Russians for you.
It is, and
long may they make silly mistakes. So interesting that Ivanivska, the mappers disagree on this, and Surat Map says that the Russians made some gains here, but Andrew Perpetua, he said the other night, and I asked him a question, and he answered that he put all of this under Russian control and then changed it the next day. And he was like, I have evidence that the Ukrainians are in this forest, they're in this forest. I have evidence that they actually have some positions, unknown positions in Ivanivska still, and that they control this, probably control that building there. And so it's just really interesting that the Ukrainians are still actually holding out in Ivanivska, which kind of was thought to have completely fallen before, but it's rubble and it's not the sort of place you can easily hold on to. But there is a disagreement there. But again, the Ukrainians, I think, are outperforming where we thought they would have been in some of these areas.
Yeah, they're getting supplied, and once again, remember, they're fighting for their dirt, and they have the home field advantage. So the supply differential now is most are agreeing instead of 7-1, about 5-1. So, which for Ukraine's a massive deal there.
Yeah, I mean, if you think at the beginning of the war, the Russians were supposedly using somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 shells a day, right? That the Russians have got a 5-1 advantage at 10,000 shells a day is bad for Ukraine, but it's not nearly as bad as it was. Like the amount of shells that they're using compared to now shows you that Russia have a shell problem too. And that's why they're getting stuff from North Korea as much as they are. Now, interesting that Klishchiivka, this town here that is, completely flattened as well, it sits below this high ground to the west. But there are claims that Andrew Perpetua said Ukrainian infantry are in the middle of Klishchiivka. The claims of a Russian capture were completely absurd. It was only ever a grey area, which is what it remains. Again, this is a pointed claim, I think, against Syriac maps. They have their arguments, Andrew, and Syriac maps. But Andrew has been saying for a long time, this is a grey zone, and you get Russians attacking and Ukrainians attacking in, and it's completely flattened, and it's not anywhere you'd want to hang on to particularly and hang out in. It's just grey zone.
It is, and I'm going to stick with my story. It's good. We've got good news around. That's good. I'm concerned about Ocherny and Karakova.
So
because listen, if we lose the road, it's a problem.
So that road is a key. I mean, you can see that Pokrovsk is an incredibly important hub there, strategic or operational hub for logistics, as is Konstantinivka, and connecting those two is important. And
people would say, okay, well, they can just go different ways. They can, but I can't. We've driven all those roads, guys, all of them, all those villages, all those towns. We go multiple different ways. This is a region where Zhenya and I roll all those roads. We know them all. And it would be so difficult to reroute supply lines. The roads are destroyed out all north of that supply line road. And it would be very slow, time-consuming, and complicated logistically. So Ukraine really needs to hold that.
Yeah.
And I want to say this. I've got about 10 minutes, Johnny.
Yep.
Listen here. Okay, so guys, I want to thank all of you for defending me in my chat. For sure, I did a quick look while Johnny was waxing eloquent. For sure, it's a bot. So, but thank you guys so much for defending me. I definitely appreciate that. I thought I was very clear and very fair. Thank you.
So Russia are definitely pressuring Ukraine around these areas. I want to know how much Russia have got left in the tank. We are seeing evidence that they are using older and older equipment. They're using suboptimal equipment like tracked garden sheds. So when they have these tanks and they build on top of the tanks, they're using scout cars have been recently used, I think, in this particular area. Actually, I think is it around this Ocheritina area, I don't know, but they're using 60-year-old vehicles. They're using golf carts, they're using motorbikes. However, they are still pushing. They still have the numerical advantage. They still have that numerical advantage in the shells. And so even though it's suboptimal and you're thinking, goodness me, Russia is still succeeding in taking territory. Now, where it leaves them, are they exhausting themselves? I don't know. I hope so.
They have people and stuff. They do not have better skill. No. They do not have bigger desire. They do not have home field advantage, which I believe is vitally important in the long run. They're not fighting for their very existence. All of these are net positives for Ukraine, but it is a challenge with quantity. And then I know I watched some of the chat and, North Korean stuff is junk and da-da-da. And it is an old stuff, but it's still stuff. And stuff falls. Yeah. So it's just important that Ukraine continue to be supplied from the West, as we are now seeing, and it's coming quicker. Yeah. And, if we can stabilize these two pushes down here, like we did Kharkiv, Ukraine will be setting up really nicely, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and so you got Krasnohorivka, you got Mariinka, Novomykhailivka. All these areas are pretty hot still. You got Staromyorska as well, which
Yes.
has actually become a bit of a problem. Well, I don't know that it is a problem for the Ukrainians. It's a problem that Russia are taking some land there and having a bit of success. But I don't think this is a particularly operationally significant area. Like my opinion is they could lose all that land back to where they started the counteroffensive. So that white line is where the Ukrainians were on May the 30th last year, right? And so they took that in the counteroffensive, and Russia are grindingly taking a bit back. But
I completely agree with you. And you understand this now that you've been all through here. We're talking about massive farms and fields outside of these villages. And, just sometimes it's better to be able to manage your resources in a better way, just especially when you're under resourced.
Yeah, especially if you can make them bleed in taking those meters.
Exactly.
A little bit of a gain maybe in the north of the Robotyne sector, just north of Verbove. Now, what's your idea about the Dnipro River? So Surat map says that Krinky is now all back under Russian control. The other mappers have it as grey zone, but I've said that that's probably doesn't indicate that the Ukrainians are there, but that they are stopping the Russians from getting there by just hitting them with drones all the time.
I think that right there is accurate.
Yeah, and Antonivsky Bridge, Surat Mats has the Russians back up to there, which is interesting.
That's because the girl walked across the bridge.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm telling you, they pushed back. I'm telling you, that's why they did push back onto that side, right up under the bridge.
Yeah,
and Krinky,
it did its job. It did its job.
It did its job.
The amount of Russian equipment and personnel that was attrited around here was just phenomenal. And those poor Ukrainians that were kind of not used as bait, but maybe used. But they were there to do a job, and it enabled the drones and the artillery to do an absolutely fantastic job around there.
And it allows more supply to come from the west for other lines. I mean, and really good guys were there.
Yeah,
we know them.
Surat Maps admits now that this is it Nestraya Island is now back under Ukrainian control.
Yeah, it's a park there.
Yeah. So I don't think the Ukrainians are really looking at getting a foothold on the other side of the Dnipro anytime soon. I think they've got other things on their mind. But it's going to be interesting to see whether we see more air defense systems get taken out. The number that have been taken out in Crimea has been phenomenal.
Let's see here. In the last couple of months, I've taken out
what's it like 15 in Crimea in the last
15 radar / S300 S400 systems. It's really good. Yeah,
it's incredible.
It's really good.
And that's what they need to do: sit back and attrit the Russians at a distance, so they don't lose any. Like the Ukrainians don't lose troops, they don't lose capabilities. They are just hammering and hammering, and then the F-16s come along, and you could get maybe air advantage in a very tactical local area to do X, Y, and Z. You can push your F-16s maybe, although I think the F-16s won't be used near here for a long time. I think they'll use them very cautiously to begin with until they get a sense of what they can do and use them safely and get their pilots operating in a war zone, but in a safe part of the war zone. And I think they'll probably inch them forward subsequently. So I wouldn't expect the F-16s to be right on the front line straight away, is my personal opinion, but I don't know.
I agree with that as well. And I think I think right now, I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic. Ukraine's doing a really good job. Supply is coming, and we're June the 17th. So for grin's sake, can we call it, let's be more than fair. Okay. September 1. Okay.
Yeah.
We have F-16s in the air. I don't think it'll be September. It's going to be October, but let's just call it September 1. Maybe best case scenario, you're looking at 2.5 months. At that point, we will see where the lines are, what the supply situation is, what's going on in the war. Maybe the war will be over by then. I mean, we don't know, but at that point, I think at that point, it will determine how the F-16s will be used personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can tell you right now, if they keep taking air defenses out of Crimea, the F-16s can smash Crimea.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I have been as upbeat as I have been in the whole length of this war, Greg, with what's been going on in Crimea, I just like when those days when the S-300s and the radars are getting blown apart. I was just like, it was almost like a sports game, and I'm
very
watching
important
goals go in, and just like
very important.
Like in my head, I'm whooping and hollering because it really does mean a lot. I mean, Crimea is, I think, going to be functionally useless for Russia going forward fairly soon, if it isn't already. To be perfectly honest,
it's definitely diminished.
Yeah. Right. I know you've got to shoot, so let's do some thanks here. So
yeah, thank you, everybody.
Steve Eck from South Africa, thank you very much. Good man, thank you. And David L, awesome. Do you prefer super chats or donations to funding? I whatever funding is great. We probably need to talk a little bit about a possibility of us. We're going to hopefully do a NATO truck at some point. That's something I've been talking about, but it's going on. It takes a lot of time to sort these things out, and I don't think they're the quickest at getting back to us. I think because they've just done a big delivery, haven't they, of NATO trucks? So
yes, they come once a month. So yes,
yeah. So JR, who is also fielding the super chats, all the chats.
Thank you, JR.
And thank you. He's let me know what are the good questions, but I've got way too many now to deal with. He's looking into that on our behalf. So thank you, JR. That's awesome. Steve Eck again, thank you. Papa Dutch for you. Greg, never get used to what is normal. That's where we get in trouble. Accepting what is without question can eventually lead to living in a closet and thinking this is big enough. That's what he has to say. So thank you to him.
Completely agree, Papa Dutch.
Thank you. And Lynn, thank you so much. Surprised it's us from Arizona. She can hear the F-16s fly over. She's right near the airbase. So thanks for the ATP Geopolitics memberships. Just whizzing on here. One of yours, Greg Parks White. Ukraine civil society needs to function as normal as possible. Football is a great tension release and builds national identity. Ukraine can multitask.
Parks White, I completely agree with you. And thank you for that, New Zealand, my friend.
Yeah.
I'm just wanting, as we say it where I come from, I want to throw the kitchen sink at this thing and get it over with, and let's stop losing Ukrainians and children and territory and buildings and lakes and rivers. I mean, in life, I just want to throw the kitchen sink at it.
Prepper Nation H says, I'm baffled that the world stands in fear of nuclear escalation. The destruction on the ground in Ukraine is already on par with multiple nuke strikes. Interestingly,
completely agree. It's
one
terrible.
of the theories is that the Novikakhovka destruction of that dam caused effectively the same as a nuclear strike in the damage it caused. Rick from the Netherlands, could Putin go nuclear on his own? Actually, this is something I don't talk about enough, that when I say Putin can press a red button, the reality is he can't, and there will be lots of checks and balances in place. Although, if you know the Cuba crisis, I don't know how things have changed since then, but the Cuban Missile Crisis, they were very close, and it was potentially maybe a little bit easier then. I don't know. It would mean the end for Russia. Would Putin commanders allow that to happen, or would they drop Putin, gain power, and continue Russian corruption? That is pure speculation to be able to answer that. I don't know. I don't know the strength of the people behind Putin. I don't know the answer to this, Greg, and I know you've got to go, but I want to know how much Putin is controlled by the FSB, or whether he has power over the FSB, whether he was put in charge by the FSB, you know, with Yeltsin, FSB, he was within the KGB himself, or whether he was always outside and controlling the situation, or has outgrown the FSB hold over him and is controlling, or whether he's under control of the FSB.
I do not know how to answer that. I personally feel that he's in control personally,
right?
Yeah. And I really also feel that one of the most influential people, Eric Wood, Elizabeth City, what's up, stud? One of the most influential people in Russia that many we do pay attention to, but not at the level we should, is Kirill. It's vital. You know what I'm talking about, right? The patriarch.
Yeah. Yes. The Orthodox Church patriarch. Yeah.
That is the FSB. That is the power of the propaganda and the control. There's a lot of evil that happens through that situation with Kirill and how that's disseminated even throughout the entire nation. So I think personally Putin's in control.
Richard
Doesn't
Bennett,
mean he can't be taken out or any of those things. I'm just to answer your question.
Yeah, and I often wonder how likely is anyone around it. He seems to have got rid of any real threats, and so the people around him are very loyal in the immediate vicinity of him. And so, you know, it's difficult to think of who could do that to him. Richard Bennett, thank you for gifting those memberships. Really kind of you, Richard. You're always there. Julian Roster, likewise. Could Hungary's membership of NATO be a potential security risk? It's 25 years since they joined, and they are pretty much aligned with Russia. You could hope they aren't privy to certain classified military information. Apparently, Hungary, NATO are stopping giving as much information to Hungary at the moment. That is happening. So Hungary will know that if they push it too much, they're going to be in trouble. They surely know that if they annoy the EU too much, they will lose a lot of money. And he also will know that Peter Magyar, this new opposition leader, has just taken a massive chunk of his votes in the EU elections. Orban will be reading the tea leaves, but also he knows the pressure he's under probably from Russia. And so, yeah, it's going to be, Hungary is going to be the nation to watch, I think, really, in Europe. A Minister for the Recovery of Stolen Toilets. For Pete's hair care, I have the same style called Little Tufts.
I'll take care of Pete's hair. I'll cut it when I get there. We'll do a video cutting his hair. So,
Papa Dutch, I wonder when Trumpty Dumpty is going to say that's a long way down. Thank you for your support, Papa
and all
Dutch.
The king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Trumpty Dumpty back together again.
Paul Gilbert, who I met, he came to my talk all the way from London. What an absolute legend! And he bought one of my hoodies. That is a great design, but I've got two designs. One is if it's a dark hoodie, you need the one with the white lettering, and if you've got a light hoodie, you need the one with the dark lettering. And he got a dark hoodie with dark lettering. And so, Paul, I'm going to send you. You let me know your size. I'm going to send you another hoodie because I feel really bad. But anyway, JMSP.
Thank you,
and
Paul.
GT on the same bill. Always a good listen. Let's keep the momentum going, everybody. Absolutely, Slava Ukraini. And Julian Roster, the next time you see Greg, bring him a pot noodle. Job done. He doesn't want a really crap. They would call it ramen in a pot or something, I think. But it's just it's the cheapest of the cheap.
I thought we were going to do fish and chips.
Well, yeah, we'll have pot noodle for starters.
Well, you know, I will tell you guys, you know, Johnny doesn't eat meat unless he's in Ukraine.
Yeah, he's in Ukraine.
Johnny doesn't hold guns.
I felt
unless he's in Ukraine. Johnny doesn't sing spiritual songs unless he's in Ukraine.
Oh, that's harsh. I gave my talk the other night, and one of the wives of one of the guys that organised it made all this wonderful food, and I didn't have the guts to say, "Look, I'm vegan," so I did have some sausage rolls.
Good for you.
But there you go. Thanks, Julian. Really appreciate that, mate. Papa Dutch again. Putin flavored Kool-Aid. What a concept!
It is.
Yes, there's a lot of people in Russia drinking that Kool-Aid. Look,
I think the ingredients to that are an extraction of Jim Jones and Guyana flavoring, Georgetown or whatever it was called down there, Guyana, Jonestown. Yeah, the Kool-Aid. That's what he's referring to. So
yeah, absolutely.
Putin should have visited Jonestown. We wouldn't have to deal with this right now. So
yeah. Well, that's all the super chats. Look, I know you guys. Go. There was so many. JR has done an amazing job of like collating so many amazing questions, and we don't have time to do them. We need to do this again and just have conversation flowing and these questions. So save those questions.
We try to do it once a week, guys, but schedules gets crazy sometimes. So
I've been so insanely busy recently, but it should be a little bit better now that talk has been and gone. Yeah, look,
Frank Schifrin, thank you for that $1.99 super chat there.
Yep, I like that one in. Any sort of last words?
No, I think we're cautiously optimistic. Let's keep the hammer down, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you all.
Absolutely. Cool beans. Well, look, thank you, everybody.
We'll see you tomorrow. Oh, by the way, for those of you on my channel right now, my stream will be at a different time tomorrow, probably earlier in the day, because I have an eye appointment tomorrow, and those guys in my channel know I have keratoconus, so I have a big eye doctor appointment tomorrow, later afternoon, but so I'll be on earlier. All right, guys, thank you. JR, thank you. Yeah, that's very good. Also,
mate. Yep, and take care, everyone. Take care, everyone. And I'm going to give you a Slava Ukraini.
Geroim Slava. See ya.
Take care, y'all. Bye-bye. Thanks for all your support.
Thank you.